So on those early trips, were you doing any sort of daily process groups?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Every day.
And what would those look like?
Um, they some of them got pretty intense. Every evening we would just do, so what worked for you today,
Mm-hmm.
what didn't work for you today, how do we want to do it differently, tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
how can we help each other better, what are you learning, that kind of stuff. In fact, that's kind of the format of all of our sessions, where what's working, what's not working, what do you want to do different,
Mm-hmm.
make a plan. And even in the individual sessions, we would do that too. So what's working for you in your life, what's not working, what do you want to get rid of and what do you want to keep, and how do you want to do things differently, when you get back home. So we do those groups every night, and then the last night we do a strength group, which would take hours. It was after we got everybody off solo. Um, we'd go through each person and say, everybody would say things that they liked about them. And if we did the whole group that way, it would take like 4 or 5 hours. We kept coming up with ways that would kind of make it a little bit shorter. So sometimes we'd do a kind of a train, where you just sit in front of each other, kind of like speed dating.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I like about you. This is what I like about you. And then you'd move down to the next one, and do that kind of stuff. But it was gratitude. It was what I appreciate about you. I want to tell you thank you for what you did for this. What I see as strengths in you. We call it a strength group. And it was pretty powerful to give people a chance to show gratitude and to be able to see what people saw as strengths in them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last night, so that was kind of the culminating group. And then the next morning, coming out of Death Hollow, we'd do what we called the Fudgesicle 500.
Mm-hmm.
It was 7 miles. If you cross-cut the washes, the turns, you'd probably cut it down to maybe 5, if you knew where you were going. And we would try to go as fast as we could, and if we could beat this time, we made up the time each time. It wasn't like as if it was a record or anything. If you could, because we'd gauge it by the group that we had. If you could beat that time, then we'll stop at the store in Boulder and buy fudgesicles for everybody to have on the way home. So, Fudgesicle 500.
Nice. Did they always beat it?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we always made sure they did. But it was cute, because when we'd get toward the end, the slower ones, were having a hard time.
Uh-huh.
The faster ones would get to the end, drop their packs, run back and grab other people's packs.
Yeah.
So it became a team-building thing, too, bringing everybody in as fast as we could. And sometimes if they were having a hard time, they'd take them by the hand and run with them, and help them, to get to the fudgesicles.
So how many years did that run?
About 8 years. Well, let me think. I did it for about 8 years. I think Gary did it for several years after that, until the district decided it was too much of a liability and decided to kill the program. But I did it for about 8 years.
Okay.
But and then after that, then I'd already, done a few things with Doug and gone on the 480 class and got to know Doug and
So
moved on.
yeah. So let's, we talk about that piece because, the name Steve Cardizano comes up.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's a little cloud in the history of wilderness therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But because he was pushing what he pushed, we've got all these programs now, and now we're available to provide a lot of good care for a lot of families.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's worth recognizing, is that maybe the wilderness piece wasn't his strong suit, but he opened a door.
Agreed.
So could you just that dynamic of Doug was doing a little bit of stuff with him,
Yeah,
and then
Doug,
he came
Doug
to
Nelson.
you?
Yeah, he was his program director, and he was creating. He created different components and stuff. But I think that the thing that we have to give Steve Cardizano credit for is that he broke out of the mindset that you can only do this for 30 days. The BYU classes were 30 days. It eventually became Boulder Outdoor Survival School, where it went 28 days. They were all in our minds. It was like, that's the longest that you really want to stay out here. And I don't know what drove him to do this. I think it might have been more monetary, honestly, than anything. But what he said is, what if we stayed longer? Would we have more impact on the kids? And then they would be able to hopefully make more changes, which would be more long lasting. And there's always a point of diminishing returns. Where you get to the place where you've just been out there. We had some kids that were struggling in the first years with Aspen, and we called him kind of a dust puppy. He just got to the point where he was so comfortable laying under the tree that it wasn't anymore a challenge for him. He wasn't going to get what he needed to get out of it. So there is a place where it isn't going to be. But what he did is he broke out the mindset of it has to be 30 days, and in the process, then we thought, yeah, you're right. And me as a therapist, because by then I was a psychologist, I go, I could have enough time, to make something happen in that length of time. So when Doug came to me and said, let's do this the right way. Let's do it where it's going to be safe, where there's going to be the right kind of experience and safety, all the kind of things you need to make it a good program. He was, first of all, absolutely convinced he wanted a licensed therapist. In my case, I was a psychologist, and that was a little bit more than a lot of the programs they were doing, either maybe substance abuse counselors or no counselors at all. They're just doing the experience. But he was convinced that he wanted to have it be a licensed therapist, but that it was a longer time too. And he says this is the part of Steve's idea that I really agree with, is that because he'd done it a couple of times with Steve and saw the impact that it had on the kids. So that's when we incorporated, and we were starting I think at 90 days. It was a 3-month program, and then we sometimes it's been scaled back to 2 months, or somewhere between 60 and 90 days is I think kind of the mainstay now. But what it did is it gave us enough time as a therapist to actually have the impact that we could have with the kids in the program, whether they were very resistant or not.
So I didn't realize the Wilderness Academy started at 90 days.
Yeah, we did to begin with, and yeah, I think it was, and it might have. We had 2 different programs. We had the Wilderness Academy and another one that I can't even remember the name of it, but it didn't go very far. It was a shorter program. I think it was a month long, and it wasn't as attractive to the parents because it didn't have couldn't have as much impact, and so we didn't really get that much enrollments. We maybe ran it once or twice, but the longer one somewhere, and it was kind of loose end, open ended. It was like 60 to 90 days. I think is what we'd say, but it gave us enough time to be able to have some impact. So
did you start those? All the students started those together? Is that how you were doing it?
You mean
then?
like closed groups?
Yeah.
To start with, we did closed groups. Yeah, and then what we do is if someone didn't make it, then we'd hold them back for the next group because they had to move. We had 3 different sections, so we had kind of the survival section that we called Coyote, and then we had the more the handcart section, which was kind of pioneerish with Dutch ovens and stuff like that. We called Buffalo. And then Eagle, which was more low impact, high tech, camping with actually backpacks and all that kind of stuff. So they had to have I had actually written curriculum then too, that I use now with the Journey, and I know that's not what everybody does, but we had a written curriculum. So if they didn't complete everything they needed to be able to move from Coyote to Buffalo, then they'd be held back, so to speak, and they'd be in for the next group. And so it gave them a lot of motivation to move forward with their groups. But it wasn't very long into it that we had to give up on that because it was really hard to collect enough kids to get a full group to be able to go. And then continuous enrollment was almost it was inevitable. It wasn't very long into the program that we started doing that. But it was to start with, they were closed groups. The first 2 or 3, maybe the first year.
I want to make sure that that we're being aware of your timeline to get you out of here.
Yeah, and I'm kind of run out of things to say, so we're probably good.
But let me just ask: is what else? Like, what little nugget there do you have? What else do you want to share? I mean, I would like to just actually keep you talking, but I'm like watching the clock, and I know that you've got to.
No, it's okay. It's good. I love working with kids, and I love therapy. I have a really hard time doing it in a box. To sit in a room and try to get kids. I mean, what happened as a high school counselor is they'd bring kids to me and they'd say, "Fix these kids, they're struggling," and to sit in a room and I love doing the assessment to try to figure out what's going on with them. It's like a mystery with every kid. That's why I love the psychology part and doing the testing. But as far as actual treatment, I would even take those high school kids out and we'd go do hikes and stuff, for our group. Even if we only had 2 hours, we'd go someplace, up in the canyon in the snow or whatever. And it just seems like as soon as you get outdoors with kids, it's like 90% of my work's done as a therapist, is that whatever experience they're experiencing is what you can apply to whatever it is that they're learning in life. Because the world does that. It serves up whatever lesson you need for whatever time you're at. And it does it a lot faster in the wilderness, and it's a lot more self-aware and conscious of those things happening. And so being able to do therapy under a tree after a kid's had a good hard week, and they're on solo and they've just been thinking about stuff, so much happens. My work is just saying, so what's going on? And then it's done. Everything else is them. And then we just solidify those lessons, and talk about what we want to, look at for the next week or whatever. So it makes treatment and therapy just so much more enjoyable. Even doing tests, I love just setting up my table out here and doing psychological, doing IQ tests outside. I don't know if it detracts from them being able to concentrate or not, but it's a lot more enjoyable for both of us, than doing it inside. And then the living with each other, that community, and being able to help each other and all that kind of stuff. It just helps them so much to understand what their families are, going through and what they've caused for their families and what they want to change to be able to do different. That it's just the most wonderful way to do therapy.